I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. I never thought it would happen to me. Affairs, betrayal, those things happen to other people. People who didn't know how to communicate or had drifted apart. Not us. Linda and I had been together for over a decade, and while it wasn't always easy, I thought we were solid. But over the past year, things started changing, little by little. At first, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It wasn't like she was suddenly distant or cold, but there were moments when it felt like she was just somewhere else. It started with her phone. We all spend too much time on our phones, I get that, but this was different. She was glued to it, even during dinner. At first, I didn't think much of it, convincing myself she was busy with work or catching up with friends. But then there were the late nights, work meetings, she said. She was in pharmaceuticals, after all, a demanding field. But then again, weren't they all? There were nights she'd come home hours later than she said she would. When I asked about it, she had a million excuses. The meeting ran long, she'd say. Or, I went for drinks with some colleagues. It was always something. I believed her at first. Why wouldn't I? We had 2 kids, a house, and more than a decade of memories. This was just a rough patch, I told myself. Everyone goes through them. I'd give her space, be more attentive, whatever it took. But no matter what I did, the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. You know that feeling? When something is off, but you can't quite figure out what it is. That was me. Still, I pushed it aside, convincing myself I was being paranoid. I didn't want to be that guy, the jealous, suspicious husband who snoops through his wife's things. One night, though, something happened that changed everything. We were supposed to go on a family vacation. The kids had been looking forward to it for weeks, and I had taken time off from work. The plan was to head to the mountains for some much-needed downtime. A few days before we left, Linda said she had to work late. I didn't think much of it. But when she didn't come home until well past midnight, I knew something wasn't right. The next morning, we had a small argument. Nothing big, just the kind of spat you have when you're both stressed and sleep-deprived. I tried to brush it off, but when I left the house for work, that gut feeling came back, stronger than ever. Later that day, I got a text from Linda, saying she wouldn't be home until late again. Another work meeting. That's when I decided to check her phone. I don't know what pushed me to do it. Maybe it was desperation or fear, but I knew I had to know what was going on. When I picked up her phone, my hands were shaking. I didn't even know what I was looking for. A message? A missed call? Something to give me an answer. At first, everything seemed normal. Her inbox was full of work-related emails, texts from friends, the usual. Then I noticed something, a conversation with someone named Mark. It was casual at first, just a few messages about work. But as I scrolled further, I started to see a pattern. There were inside jokes, comments about how much fun they had during that last trip. My heart raced as I kept scrolling, reading messages that got more personal with each swipe of my thumb. Then, I saw it. One message that made everything fall apart: "Can't wait to see you again tomorrow, baby." I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. My stomach twisted, and my heart pounded in my chest. I kept reading, hoping somehow I was misunderstanding, that this wasn't what it looked like. But it was. It was all there in front of me, laid out like a roadmap to my wife's betrayal. She wasn't working late. She was with him. The kids were at school, and the house was quiet. I just sat there, staring at the screen, trying to process what I had just found. How long had this been going on? How could I have been so blind? The woman I'd built a life with was lying to me, sleeping with someone else while I was at home, taking care of our kids and trusting her without question. I felt sick. My hands were still shaking, but now it was from rage. 1,000 thoughts rushed through my mind, and I wasn't sure what to do next. Should I call her? Confront her right then? What would I even say? My brain felt like it was in a fog, and no matter how hard I tried to think clearly, all I could feel was the heat rising in my chest, the anger, the betrayal, the hurt. I decided not to say anything that day. Not yet. I needed to process this, figure out my next move. Instead, I put her phone back exactly where it was, trying to act as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. From that moment on, I couldn't look at Linda the same way. Every time she smiled at me, I saw her laughing with him. Every time she touched me, I wondered if she had touched him the same way. That night, she came home late again, but this time, I was ready. She walked in, kissed me on the cheek, and acted like everything was fine. I didn't say anything. I just watched her, trying to read her body language, looking for any sign that she knew I had found out. But she didn't. She just went about her evening like nothing had happened. We ate dinner together, watched TV with the kids, and went to bed like we always did. Except this time, I didn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about every lie, every excuse, every moment she had spent with him. The next few days were a blur. I went to work, came home, and played the part of the unsuspecting husband, all while quietly gathering evidence. I went through her emails, her phone bills, anything I could find that would give me more insight into what she had been doing. And the more I found, the angrier I became. It wasn't just a fling. They had been seeing each other for months, meeting up on her work trips, spending nights together while I was at home with our kids. I felt like an idiot for not seeing it sooner, for trusting her so blindly. But now, I knew. And I wasn't going to let this slide. I didn't confront her right away. I wanted to be sure I had everything I needed before I made my move. I wanted to see her face when she realized I knew. I wanted her to feel the same pain I had felt when I discovered her lies. So I waited, biding my time, letting her dig herself deeper into the lie. I knew it wouldn't be long before the truth came out, but I wanted to be in control when it did. I wasn't going to be the clueless husband anymore. I was going to make her regret every moment she had spent with him. And when the time was right, I was going to destroy everything she had built with him. The morning after I found the messages was almost surreal. I woke up before Linda and just lay there, watching her sleep. There was something both peaceful and disturbing about seeing her like that, so unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I couldn't believe that the woman lying next to me was the same person who had been sneaking around, texting another man behind my back. Part of me wanted to shake her awake and confront her right then and there. But another part of me, the part that had always been methodical, told me to wait. I needed to be sure, to gather everything I could before I blew this thing wide open. I got out of bed quietly, slipping into the kitchen to make coffee, trying to clear my head. I had a million things to think about. The kids, for one. Emma and Daniel were our world, and no matter how much I wanted to rage at Linda, I had to think of them first. How would they take it if this exploded? If I left? If she left? What would they say at school? I couldn't just storm into this without a plan. They deserved better than that. But then, as I sat there sipping my coffee, I thought about how this whole thing had already affected them. Linda wasn't the same mom she used to be. I had noticed her pulling away from all of us, but I chalked it up to work stress, life stress. Now I realized she was pulling away because she was emotionally somewhere else, with him. God knows how long this had been going on. And suddenly, that little voice in the back of my head told me it had been way too long. I decided to dig deeper. After Linda left for work that day, I went through everything. I combed through her phone records, checking every number she had called and texted in the past few months. There it was, Mark's number, everywhere. Late-night calls, early morning texts. It was like they couldn't get enough of each other. I felt sick every time I saw his name. How had I been so blind? How could I have let this happen under my own roof? I found old hotel confirmations in her email, hotels in cities she had told me were for conferences or workshops. Each one matched a trip she had taken without me, always with some excuse about how it wasn't worth bringing the kids along or how I needed to stay behind for work. Now I knew why. She hadn't been working at all. She had been spending time with him. I even found pictures. They weren't scandalous, but that almost made it worse. There were a few selfies, mostly of them at restaurants or in front of landmarks, images that looked innocent enough unless you knew the truth. The casual way they stood together, the way she leaned into him like it was the most natural thing in the world, made my blood boil. This wasn't just a fling. It was an affair, a full-blown relationship. And I was the fool who hadn't seen it. I wanted to punch something. Break something. Anything to release the rage building inside me. But I couldn't. I had to keep it together, had to be smart about this. So instead of acting on impulse, I started planning. I took screenshots of everything, every message, every email, every hotel booking. I made copies of her phone records, her credit card statements. If I was going to confront her, I wasn't going to give her the chance to deny it or twist it around. I wanted to lay it all out in front of her, undeniable and brutal. That night, when Linda came home, I played it cool. I was surprised at how easy it was to slip back into the role of the unsuspecting husband. She walked in, kissed me on the cheek, and smiled like nothing was wrong. I could barely stand the sight of her, but I forced myself to act normal. We ate dinner with the kids, watched TV, and went to bed like we always did. All the while, I felt like I was living in some kind of twisted nightmare. I spent the next few weeks gathering everything I needed, watching her every move. It was like I had become a stranger in my own life, observing from the outside. I noticed every lie, every excuse. There were more work dinners, more late meetings. I kept my mouth shut, but inside I was seething. She had no idea I knew. And that gave me power. One evening, after a particularly late night, I decided it was time to put my plan into action. Linda came home around 11 p.m., smelling like expensive wine and perfume that wasn't hers. She kissed me on the cheek, barely making eye contact as she brushed past me toward the bedroom. I followed her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Long night?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Yeah," she said casually, "the meeting ran late, and then I grabbed dinner with a few coworkers. You know how it is." I nodded, watching her as she undressed and got ready for bed. The anger was bubbling up inside me, but I held it down. I couldn't confront her yet. Not here, not with the kids asleep in the next room. I needed to do this the right way. The next morning, I set everything up. Linda was going away for another work trip that weekend, and I had a feeling it was going to be with Mark. That's when I would strike. When Friday rolled around, she packed her bags and kissed me goodbye like it was any other day. I smiled back, told her to have a great trip, and watched her walk out the door. Once she was gone, I grabbed my own bag. I had hired a private investigator to track her movements over the weekend, but I didn't need him to tell me where she was going. I already knew. I drove to the hotel where she was staying and waited. Sure enough, a few hours later, I saw her car pull up, followed by Mark's. They walked into the hotel together, laughing, completely oblivious to the fact that I was watching them. I snapped a few pictures, just enough to add to my growing pile of evidence. That night, as they enjoyed their weekend together, I sat in my car, stewing in anger. It was almost unbearable, knowing they were up there, probably in bed together, while I was sitting outside like a fool. But I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I had a plan, and it was only a matter of time before they both paid for what they had done. When Linda came home on Sunday, she acted like nothing had happened. She even brought me a souvenir, a cheap keychain from a gift shop, like she had been on a real work trip. I took it from her with a smile, all the while imagining how I would use every piece of evidence I had gathered to blow her world apart. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to ruin her. I had already spoken to a lawyer, gotten everything in place. When I was ready, I would serve her divorce papers, complete with evidence of her affair. She wouldn't see it coming. And when she realized what she had lost, her marriage, her family, everything, I would be there to watch it all crumble. But not yet. I had to wait for the perfect moment, and when it came, it would be glorious. The tension was unbearable. Every day felt like a performance, each word and gesture calculated to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Linda had no idea I knew everything, every sordid detail of her affair with Mark. She moved through our house like nothing had changed, smiling at the kids, kissing me goodbye in the mornings, acting like the devoted wife she clearly wasn't. But to me, it was all a farce, and the mask she wore was starting to crack. I could see through her now, every lie and every excuse. But still, I waited. Timing was everything. I wasn't just going to confront her in a heated moment and let her scramble for an excuse. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her betrayal, and for that, I needed to hit her where it hurt the most, our life. The life we built together. The kids were at the center of my mind. Emma and Daniel deserved better than to be caught in the middle of a messy fight. I loved them more than anything, and as much as I wanted to tear Linda apart for what she had done, I didn't want them to suffer. But then again, wasn't this already affecting them? Linda had been so distracted, so distant. I had tried to shield them from it, but there was only so much I could do. They weren't blind. Kids always know when something's wrong. That Sunday, after she came home from her trip, Linda was in a chipper mood, as if nothing in the world could bother her. She had the audacity to bring souvenirs for the kids, cheap trinkets that probably took 5 minutes to pick out. Emma and Daniel were thrilled, not realizing the real story behind those little gifts. I stood by, watching, my jaw clenched as she played the part of the perfect mother. I knew I couldn't wait much longer. The weight of the secret I carried was becoming too much. I wanted her to feel what I was feeling, to understand the pain she had inflicted on me, on us. The following weekend, Linda had another work trip. She said it so casually, like it was just another one of her busy, successful career moves. I knew better. I had her entire itinerary in my mind, though I didn't need it to know she would be meeting Mark again. She packed her bag with that same nonchalance, kissed the kids goodbye, and then turned to me with that same sweet smile she used to flash when we were actually happy. "I'll be back Sunday evening," she said, giving me a peck on the cheek like always. "Have a good trip," I replied, keeping my voice steady. This time, though, I wasn't staying behind. As soon as she pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my bag and followed her, keeping my distance. I knew exactly where she was going. I'd been there before, standing outside that same hotel, watching them go in together, like nothing mattered but the two of them. When she arrived, Mark was already there. I parked a block away and watched from a distance as she got out of the car and walked right up to him, smiling like she hadn't a care in the world. They disappeared into the hotel together, laughing and holding hands. It was enough to make me sick, but I held it together. This was all part of the plan. I snapped a few more photos, adding them to the growing collection of evidence I had already amassed. There was no need to follow them further, I knew exactly what was going on behind those closed doors. Instead, I drove back home, knowing the next time I saw Linda, it would be the last time she'd look at me with that fake innocence. That night, I couldn't sleep. The anger that had been simmering for months was now boiling over. I couldn't wait any longer. I was ready to blow this whole thing up. On Sunday evening, Linda walked through the door like nothing had changed. She was all smiles, once again handing out her cheap gifts to the kids and acting like the loving wife and mother she pretended to be. But I wasn't playing along anymore. I sat there, stone-faced, waiting for the right moment. "Everything go well on your trip?" I asked, my voice calm, almost too calm. She glanced at me with a smile. Yeah, it was fine. Just the usual meetings. Nothing too exciting. I nodded, trying to suppress the rage bubbling up inside me. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her I knew everything, but I held back. The kids were in the next room, watching TV, blissfully unaware of the ticking time bomb in their living room. Good to hear, I said, standing up from the couch. Because we need to talk. Her smile faltered for just a moment. Oh. About what? I gestured toward the kitchen, signaling that I didn't want to have this conversation in front of the kids. She followed me, still oblivious to what was coming. I turned to face her once we were in the kitchen, the door closed behind us. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands were shaking, but I steadied myself. I had to stay calm, had to keep control. I know, Linda, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She frowned, confused. Know what? I know about Mark. I know about all of it. For a split second, I saw the panic in her eyes. It was brief, but it was there. She tried to recover, to play it off like I was mistaken, but it was too late. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice wavering just a little. I didn't say anything at first. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I had saved every text message, every hotel receipt, every photo. I held it up for her to see, and her face went pale. You've been lying to me for months, I said, my voice steady now. I know you've been seeing him. I know everything. She stared at the phone, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. The color drained from her face, and for the first time in months, I saw real fear in her eyes. John, she started, but I cut her off. Don't. Don't you dare try to deny it. I've seen the texts, Linda. I've seen the emails. I've watched you meet him at that hotel. I know everything. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. I'm sorry, she whispered. Sorry. I snapped, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. You're sorry. You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and all you can say is you're sorry. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let her play the victim here. This wasn't some mistake she could cry her way out of. I never meant for it to go this far, she said, her voice trembling. I never meant to hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh. Well, you did. You hurt me. You hurt our family. And now, you're going to pay for it. I walked over to the kitchen table and grabbed a folder I had prepared earlier. Inside were the divorce papers, already filled out and ready to be served. I threw them on the table in front of her. This is over, Linda, I said, my voice cold. You're going to sign those papers, and we're done. Her eyes widened in shock as she stared down at the papers. John, please. Don't do this. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can. No, I said firmly. There's no fixing this. You made your choice, and now you're going to live with the consequences. The tears were flowing freely now, but I didn't care. I had waited too long for this moment, and I wasn't about to back down. I don't want to lose you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Well, you should have thought about that before you decided to sleep with another man, I shot back. For a long moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of everything crashing down around us. I could hear the kids laughing in the next room, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit their lives. I'll give you until tomorrow to sign the papers, I said finally, turning to leave the kitchen. And then I want you out of this house. As I walked away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The damage was done. The next morning came too quickly. The weight of the previous night's confrontation hung over the house like a heavy fog. I had barely slept, my mind racing through the events, replaying every word, every tear. I had seen Linda break down before, but never like this. It was as if her whole world was crumbling, and for a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I heard her moving around in the kitchen as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Part of me wanted to just stay there, pretend the world outside didn't exist. But I couldn't avoid this forever. I had given her a deadline, she needed to sign the divorce papers by the end of the day. I wasn't about to back down now. I forced myself out of bed, showered, dressed, and went downstairs. The kids were already eating breakfast, unaware of the tension that lingered in the air. They were laughing, talking about their plans for the day, completely innocent to the storm that had already hit. Linda was sitting at the table, a cup of coffee in front of her. She looked exhausted, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She didn't meet my gaze as I walked in, and I could feel the silence between us. It wasn't the kind of silence we used to share, the comfortable kind that came from years of being together. No, this was different. This was the silence of two people who no longer knew each other. I grabbed my own cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching her. I could tell she hadn't signed the papers yet. They sat on the kitchen table, untouched, a ticking bomb waiting to go off. "Are you going to sign them?" I asked quietly, not wanting to disturb the kids' chatter. She didn't respond at first. She just stared down at the papers, her fingers trembling slightly as she wrapped them around the coffee cup. "John," her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "I don't want this." "I know you don't," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "But it's too late. You made your choice." She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with so much sadness, it almost caught me off guard. This wasn't the defiant woman I had confronted the night before. This was someone broken, someone who knew they had lost everything. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, her voice cracking. "I really am." The kids finished their breakfast, and I forced myself to put on a smile, sending them off with hugs and promises that we'd do something fun later. I watched them leave, heading off to a friend's house for the day, and then turned back to Linda, my patience thin. "Linda, the kids are gone," I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "We need to talk about this. You need to sign the papers." "I don't want to sign them," she said, her voice stronger now, more resolute. "I don't want to give up on us." "There's nothing left to give up on," I replied, my anger simmering beneath the surface. "You gave up the moment you decided to be with him. This is over." She stood up then, pushing her chair back so quickly it nearly toppled over. The desperation in her eyes was unmistakable, and for the first time, I saw just how terrified she was. "Please, John," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. We can go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes, just, don't end this like this. Don't throw away everything we've built." I shook my head, my chest tightening with the weight of it all. "You're the one who threw it away, Linda. Not me. You made that decision the moment you started lying, sneaking around behind my back. There's no going back." Her eyes filled with tears again, and she reached out, grabbing my arm. "I was stupid, okay? I was lost, I didn't know what I was doing. But I love you. I still love you. Can't we at least try?" The part of me that had been hardened by the betrayal wanted to shake her off, to tell her that love wasn't enough to fix what she had broken. But there was a tiny flicker of doubt in my mind, one that I had been ignoring for weeks. What if we could fix this? What if there was a way back from the edge? But before I could say anything, she let go of my arm, her face pale and drawn. She looked at me like she was about to say something, but instead, she just turned and walked out of the kitchen. I thought she was going to the bedroom, or maybe to cool off, but something about the way she moved, so slow and deliberate, made me uneasy. I followed her. "Linda." I didn't finish the sentence. When I stepped into the hallway, I saw the front door closing behind her. She was leaving. Not just the room. Not just the house. I rushed outside, my heart pounding, not knowing what she was doing. She was standing by the driveway, staring blankly ahead, as if she were lost in her own mind. "Linda, what the hell are you doing?" I demanded. She didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge me. Her eyes were fixed on the street, her breathing shallow and uneven. Panic clawed at my chest as I stepped closer, calling her name again, but it was like she couldn't hear me. And then she walked into the street. "Linda!" I shouted, running after her. Everything slowed down. The sound of tires screeching, the blare of a horn, the sharp intake of breath as Linda turned her head just in time to see the car barreling toward her. She didn't move. She just stood there, frozen in place. The impact was sickening. Her body crumpled like a rag doll, thrown across the pavement, her head hitting the asphalt with a sickening thud. The car came to a stop, the driver screaming, but all I could do was stand there, my heart pounding in my ears as the world around me shattered. I rushed to her side, my hands shaking as I knelt beside her. Blood pooled beneath her head, her eyes half open but unseeing. I screamed her name, shaking her, begging her to wake up, to tell me this was just a nightmare. But she didn't move. I didn't hear the sirens. I didn't feel the hands pulling me away as paramedics arrived, working frantically to save her. All I could see was her face, her lifeless eyes, the blood soaking into the pavement. I don't know how much time passed before they finally stopped. One of the paramedics shook his head, and I felt my world collapse. Linda was gone. The rest of the day was a blur. The police arrived, asking questions I couldn't answer. Neighbors gathered, whispering in hushed tones, but I couldn't hear them. I couldn't hear anything but the sound of her voice, her last words echoing in my mind. "I still love you." It wasn't supposed to end like this. Not with blood on the pavement. Not with her body lifeless in the street. I had wanted revenge, yes, but not this. Not death. That night, I sat in the house we had shared for years, surrounded by the ghost of a life I no longer recognized. The divorce papers were still on the table, untouched. And I realized, in the quiet darkness, that I had lost more than just a wife. I had lost the chance to forgive. To heal. To find a way forward. And now, it was too late. She was gone. And so was everything we had ever been.